We're looking at reading and writing to files in Java. There's a lot of ways to do this. We're going to look at one of the easiest and most popular ways to do it using a buffered writer and buffered reader. Let's go ahead and make our buffered writer. We'll say buffered writer equals new buffered writer new file writer. And then in brackets, we're going to put the name of the file in quotation marks. Let's just write to output file.txt. And we'll need a capital W on this file writer. So what's happening here is we're making an object called a buffer writer that's just going to do the writing for us. We've named it writer. And then we're just passing that buffered writer a file called output file.txt. If that file doesn't already exist on our computer in the directory that Java is going to look in, then this file writer object is just going to make one for us. So it'll create output file.txt if it doesn't already exist in the directory that it's looking in. And once we actually make this file, then we'll go take a look at which directory Java does automatically put it in. Right now we have a bunch of errors in here as well, all underlined in red, because in order to use buffered writer and file writer, we have to import them. So we could write our import statements up here. I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-O, which is just going to import everything that Java thinks that I need. And there's a couple other small things we need to do before we can use this. When we do input and output in Java, then there's a decent chance of our program throwing an input-output exception, which is just when something goes wrong with the input or output. And so we need to account for that in some way. We could write up here, throws IO exception, and then import IO exception. That will work, but it's not exactly the best way to handle it. And generally, it's better to catch exceptions instead of throwing them. Throwing them pretty much just says, I don't care about this exception. Let's just get rid of it, discard it. Catching them is better practice. So we're going to catch this. We're going to put our buffered writer declaration inside of a try. So we'll just copy and paste this. Cut and paste, get rid of it, put it inside the try. And then we're going to hit catch exception E. And we'll just print out the stack trace for E. And now let's use our buffered writer. Just to test it out right away, let's say writer.write. This text will be written to file. And then we need to close this writer as soon as we're done with it. We'll say writer.close. And now we can run this and go check out our new file that Java's written to. So we called it output file.txt. There we go. And it says this text will be written to file. And we're going to read this same file in. But before we do that, let's tidy up our program a little bit. Right now we have all this inside of the main method. Let's make a separate method real quick. Public static void write file. And we're just going to copy and paste this code into there. So it's inside of write file. And then from the main method, we'll just call write file right away. So we could run this right now and it would do the exact same thing as it did last time, just write to this text file here. It just looks a lot cleaner now. And let's also write a new method for reading our file in. Let's say a public static string read file. So write file isn't going to return anything. That's why we have return type void. But public static string read file is going to return a string. And that's just going to be the string that we read in from the file. Let's say string user info equals empty. And at the end of the method, we'll return a string. Let's say return user info. So we're just going to make our writer write some user info to the file, and then the read file is going to read that user info in and store it in a string. In write file, we used a buffered writer. In read file, we're going to use a buffered reader. And again, we're going to declare it inside of a try catch block. Catch exception E again. And just print stack trace. In try, we'll make buffered reader equals new buffered reader new file reader, and we'll pass it our output file.txt. So it's just going to read in that file that we made. And again, I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-O to import all this stuff that we need. Put a space in here. It's saying that file reader can't be resolved to a type. It didn't import it for some reason. I'll just hit Control-Shift-O again, see if it does. There we go. Now it's imported, and we're just going to close this right away too before we forget. Let's say reader.close. And now let's go up to our write file, and let's write the info that we're going to send into that file that we're making. Let's just say username cool guy 37 new line. \n just puts a new line into our string. So right now this is going to write out username cool guy 37, and then on the next line it's going to write out level 18, and then \n again. So now on the next line it's going to write XP 1550, and we'll add another new line on the end there just in case we write anything else after. And we'll take a look at what this looks like in a second. We'll write it to a file. But before we do that, let's just finish our read file method. Let's say string current line, and then we'll say while current line equals reader dot read line does not equal null. And I'll explain this in a sec. We're just gonna put our code in here. Let's say user info plus equals current line, and then we'll put a new line into user info plus equals new line character. So we have this string current line, and for every pass of the while loop, reader is going to read a line and store it in current line. And as long as the result of that, as long as the current line does not equal null, null just being empty, as long as it does not equal null, then our user info string is going to add the current line into it. And then it's going to add a new line character. Right now, let's just run the program as is. We haven't even called our method read file yet. But let's just see what our file looks like with this new user info in there. Let's save and run the program. And then I'll go find user info again. No, what was it called? It was called output file. Output file. So here's output file. I'll make this a little bit bigger. We have username cool guy 37 level 18 XP 1550. So every time we put \n, then it just jumped to the next line and kept writing. And now let's call read file. Let's say string user info equals read file. So whatever is returned by read file, which is going to be our string, is going to be stored inside of this new variable user info. And then we'll just print out user info, system.out.println user info. Let's run this and see what we get. We get username cool guy 37 level 18 XP 1550. I missed some spaces in here. It looks a little bit messy, but that's all right. We'll just put one in here, and before cool guy 37. Run it again. Username cool guy 37 level 18 XP 1550. And let's take a look at where we put the new line in here. That's inside of our read file method. Inside of the while loop, we put the new line in. We might think that it would work fine without it, but what actually happens is everything just gets read into the same line, because buffered reader dot read line doesn't take in new line characters. So even though we had these new line characters, these \n's inside of our file, read line just takes in the line of text. It ignores the new line character. It just reads in cool guy 37, and when it sees new line, then it says, okay, I've done my job, I've grabbed cool guy 37. It doesn't actually grab the new line character. So without putting this new line inside of our read file, what we would get is everything just printed all to the same line. So we get username cool guy 37, level 18, XP, all on the same line. So that's why we need this extra new line character in here. This new file that we made, by the way, the output file.txt, just gets saved to the project folder. So if we go find it, we say output file.txt. You might expect that Eclipse would save it inside of the source folder next to the file that we're working in, but it actually saves it in a project folder. So that's something to keep in mind, just in case you need to find that file for any reason.